Welcome back to the Hard Skills Show, where we take a deep dive into the most challenging soft skills required to navigate leadership uncertainty, complexities, and change today and into the future. I'm your host, Dr. Mira Broncu, psychologist, leadership consultant, and founder of TowerScope. And I am super excited to talk with today's guest. She and I have not met until right now, but we read about her areas of interest and influence, and I swear my assistant and I were like, oh my gosh, she's totally on the same wavelength. Out of the many topics we could talk about today, we are talking about introverted leaders. There's lots of other areas we can talk about. That's the one we're focusing on today. And, start thinking about, like, have you ever felt like the only way you could effectively navigate workplace politics is by being extroverted? Nope, not true. Introverted leaders often hold untapped advantages in navigating organizational politics, and we are here to talk about why and how and our own introverted leadership journeys. So whether you're introverted or extroverted, or a leader managing teams, or simply just trying to support your colleagues, this is a conversation for you. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Mira. I'm delighted to be here and love this topic, obviously.
Yes. Now, I'm going to leave you on the edge of your seats for just a second because I have one last quick announcement before we get into it. I've had a lot of discussions in the last 2 to 3 weeks with my clients about feeling stuck, feeling overwhelmed, looking for new ways to balance keeping themselves and their team members engaged while feeling like they themselves must focus on preparing backup plans in case they lose their jobs. And I've been writing in my newsletter about identifying and overcoming learned helplessness, that sort of combination of feeling stuck or so overwhelmed that it holds us back from taking any action that could help us and others. So if that piece resonates for you, it has made me think a lot about offering a workshop on some of this. When you face any leadership challenges, including right now, having a clear set of principles or a framework for taking action, making decisions, it helps you feel more confident and grounded in the actions that you might want to take. And each time you face a new uncertainty, an opportunity, a challenge, or a role, it's helpful to just revisit and revise your framework. So that includes just reflecting on questions like, how do I show up as a leader now? Who must I become to live up to this moment? What have I overcome that has made me more resilient, effective, and what must I still overcome? Which strengths could best help me navigate current leadership challenges and which might get in the way? And is it okay to show up for my team as my authentic self when my authentic self right now is exhausted, worried, and stressed? Would it be more helpful to my team if I don't show up fully authentically like that? These are questions of identity. Our identity is not just a static set of personality characteristics. Our upbringing, our environment, and our context does shape it. And if you're looking for some support to start answering questions like this, to help you take a more intentional action in your leadership role or journey, I put together this workshop on May 21st. It's called Developing and Defining Your Leadership Identity in 2025. It includes a leadership assessment, several tools to help you explore how to apply your leadership style and identity to current leadership challenges, decisions, transitions, people management. Right now, it's open by private invitation to my newsletter subscribers only. So they get a special preferred subscriber price if they register by April 18th. So if you hop on my newsletter before then, you can receive that access, or you can wait until I announce it publicly. But I just wanted you all to hear that and to think about it and to consider whether this might be the time for that kind of thing. Now, in that context, Cynthia and I are both really interested in leadership identity and how to sort of identify what are my sort of inner strengths, my innate strengths, the things that maybe can rise to the occasion right now. And I think we'll probably get into some of that as well. So let me introduce her right now. Cynthia Pong, JD. So she's a lawyer by trade, brings 20 years of negotiation expertise and strategic leadership advising to her work as an executive coach. Her insights on power, influence, and workplace dynamics have been featured in Harvard Business Review, The Atlantic, Forbes, and other major networks. She has a law degree from NYU and is a former public defender. And prior to that, she graduated from Brown University with a degree in ethnic studies. Her Anthem award-winning Leadership Accelerator program equips leaders to navigate complex organizational politics while staying authentic, with graduates securing prestigious fellowships at the White House, Harvard, Stanford. Amazing. And she is the author of Don't Stay in Your Lane, the Career Change Guide for Women of Color. So with all of that in mind, I'm super curious to start with your original trade as a lawyer and a public defender. So I wonder, did you know back then that you were sort of leading with an introverted identity as a lawyer? And if so, or if not, what did you learn from that experience? And how did you sort of navigate the world of, the public defender world as an introvert?
I love that question. Thank you for the super kind intro. So I didn't have a lot of awareness around being an introvert when I was a lawyer and when I was a practicing public defender, which is interesting because the whole reason for my pivot was because I had a really intense experience of burnout in that job. And I talk about this in one of my keynotes, Whole Self Entrepreneurship, Lead with Your Identities, Idiosyncrasies, and Values. I talk about how my introversion was a big piece of what actually drove me out of that work. Because it's high stakes, high volume, high stress work. Constantly there's a million things coming at you. It's like very overstimulating. And I didn't realize it. I really just thought at the time, Mira, like, I just got to get better at dealing with this. I should have like built up more resilience, like you were saying, and like stuff like that. But the job required a lot of me basically covering in an extroverted way, like, court, you have to speak up, you have to advocate, you are an advocate, like you really sometimes have to express yourself in those ways. And so, of course, I developed those skills and I love that I did because they are very useful. But what it was doing at the time was like, it put me kind of so skewed out of balance that my lack of kind of caring for the introverted side of me or like those needs really just built up and like culminated in this kind of complex burnout. So, that was sort of my experience of it. I didn't really figure that out until later.
Yeah. And, it's funny because I like to tell people I'm a pretend extrovert. Like I'm
Yeah.
really good at it.
Yeah.
You would not even know.
Correct.
And there's a lot of extroverts that learn really well how to present as an extrovert to sort of fit into a predominantly extroverted industry such as yours, right? So I'm curious, like, what did you learn from that experience, and why did you become, or how did you become more interested in this sort of identity as part of your exploration in the work that you do now?
Yeah. Well, I wish I could tell you the exact moment that I kind of like learned this, but I can't really pinpoint a moment, but I have that same experience that you've had where people are like, no way, you couldn't possibly be an introvert. Like they literally think it's a joke that I tell as part of like my bit or something when I'm giving speeches and things. But it's not, it's true. And so I started thinking about that, like, oh, that's interesting. Like, why are they so surprised about that? Because I kind of am sort of loud online. So it made me realize, and I'm very interested always in like disparate impact. You know what I mean? Like, okay, why do people associate introversion with like not that behavior? Why do they seem to be like underestimating me when they find out I'm an introvert and they're like really shocked that I can do something, that is kind of like just like public speaking skills or communication skills or things like that, when 56.8% of people globally identify as introverts, according to Myers-Briggs. So I was like, what is this about? Because you also look at like the top of org charts and frequently you see CEOs who not only are typically men, but like also they're that classic style of like transformational leader where they're just giving these like big speeches and like they're charismatic and all that stuff. So I was just interested in like, why is there this disparity here? I also, in addition to it being gendered, I think it's even more nuanced than that and intersectional. But started digging into more recently. And I wrote about this in my Forbes contributor column, but like the actual data around introverted leaders leading their engaged teams to 28% higher productivity, that actually did blow my mind a little bit, Mira, because I was like,
Mhm.
whoa, there's empirical evidence to show that if you have an engaged team and they've got ideas and they're innovating and they're like, moving and grooving, they do better with a leader who's an introvert. So I found that very interesting. I feel like that's not often known or cited. And I don't know, I'm kind of just a nerd. So like just got into this, and in so doing, being loud about my introversion, a lot of introverts, found me, and like, I don't know, it's kind of great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the problem is that we often mistake, and usually it's non-introverts, people who are extroverts,
Mhm.
stake introversion with shyness
Yes.
or anxiety
Yeah.
or social awkwardness.
Yeah.
And it's none of those. Those are
Yeah.
different categories of experiences and characteristics,
Yes.
right?
100%.
Introversion is just about how much energy you derive an experience from an interpersonal interaction. And
Hmm.
so it's also not like antisocial or asocial. It's not a hatred of people. It's not wanting to not be with people. It
Right.
is actually an extreme sensitivity to people. It is taking in so much of what people have to offer that you're saturated at a much, you know, um, sort of quicker level than
Hmm.
extroverts that need a whole lot more to get saturated on the people
Hmm.
stuff, right?
Yep. Yep, nailed it. And it's like you can kind of imagine it's like a multi-circle Venn diagram situation. It can overlap with those other things, but it's not synonymous. And now you can, since you've given such an eloquent definition, maybe people can understand why I burned out in my first job because it's like you're in court. It's an overstimulating environment. There's five things happening at once. You're tracking where you are on the sign up list. You're also signed up in five other courtrooms. Your client's trying to talk to you. The court officer is trying to talk to you. Like, all of those things happening every single day. That's why I just completely depleted into burnout.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, I would love to hear more about a couple of things
Mm,
that you mentioned. One is, and we'll touch on this just a little bit, but then we're going to go right into an ad break. Um, Love to hear a little bit about, you mentioned the intersectionality
mm,
of
mm,
introversion. I would love
mm.
to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, so just you could take me as an example. I'm Asian presenting. I am an Asian American woman. I wear glasses. Like I'm kind of nerdy by personality. I am also an introvert. And I think that like there's a number of biases that may come up when people see me. And so they might just think like, oh, she's just like a nerdy, awkward Asian girl or something like that, and therefore not leadership material. All those things combined together, it kind of like compounds in a way, whereas other people, like a Black woman who's an introvert, for example, will face a different combination because
Mm,
the kind of the bias there that's going to come up is Black women are assertive, and so there might be some cognitive dissonance from like if they're an introvert and they're supposed to be quote unquote assertive, then like that there's different blowback from that, so like your introversion, mine, the perception of that will look differently in the workplace, especially when you're navigating different workplace politics. So I think that's important to understand because it means strategies that work for you may not work for me. If they work for me, they may not work for someone else. You know what I mean? So yeah.
brilliant. Yes. I have a million other things to say about that, but we are reaching an ad break. So we're going to take a pause. You are listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Cynthia Pong, JD, and author of Don't Stay in Your Lane, The Career Change Guide for Women of Color. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. At that time, if you're listening right now, you can find us live streaming on LinkedIn, YouTube, several other locations at talkradio.nyc. And we'll be right back in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with our guest today, Cynthia Pong. We have been talking about the intersectionality of introversion, which I am so interested in, because you're right. There's already the misunderstanding and misperception of introversion, and then you take that personality style and it can clash with our definition of what a leader is, quote unquote, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which in the US, there's all of these definitions that sort of equate with an extroverted style, loud, charismatic, immediately quick, decisive, quick talker, quick-witted, all of those things, right? And then you add on top of that, when women and other marginalized identities try to go for these leadership positions, leadership roles,
Mm-hmm.
and they try to emulate, or they actually have those skills, all of a sudden they're questioned, they get harsh judgment about it. And we call that weakness misattribution, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden that thing that is supposed to be a strength is seen as a weakness because it clashes with the identity of gender, right?
Yes.
And then you add on top of that, the perception of, an Asian woman, right? And what's quote unquote expected, or a Black woman or whatever. And this also applies to men, right? Like I've met kind of like large, overbearing, tall men who are very introverted. And you also have like should I see him as a leader because he's this large white man and he's he's got the physique, or do I not because he's quiet, and what does quiet mean for him versus a woman? Like I'd love to hear more about how you make sense of all of this.
I mean, it truly is like, I love everything you shared then, and thank you for giving the actual term for weakness misattribution, because I didn't know that particular term, but that is the thing. Like, people from different identities can unconsciously, subconsciously be punished for having certain personality types, certain characteristics, certain preferences, if and when that clashes with how they might present externally. So, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head right there. I'm not sure what there is to say about it, except that I think all of us, if we care about leadership and we care about being empathetic, compassionate, supportive leaders, and I think anyone of any gender can be any of those things, then we need to be more aware of it. So kind of like making sure you check yourself when you might have a knee-jerk reaction or a thought. If you've got two people and you've only have one spot to promote them to, like, are you looking at them fairly? Could there be things that are making you think, oh, candidate A is better than candidate B, that are tied into these types of weakness misattributions or things like that, like, or a more day-to-day mundane example of like just how much airtime people get in meetings. I mean, that's one that intersects with the introversion a ton, right? Because as a person who prefers introversion and like the energy doesn't come in that way that you explained earlier, I tend to be quieter in meetings, but does that mean that I don't have great ideas or that I have nothing to contribute? Absolutely not. But like I love writing instead, so like, are you doing things on your team where you're giving people options to participate and contribute, or is everyone feeling like they have to be fit a certain mold? Because that's going to stymie, that's going to hold your team back.
Yes. This is reminding me, some of my favorite rules, like if you're going to be a leader of a team of people who, span introversion, extroversion, and all the other, sort of traits. One of my ground rules is time equity. So I just share with everybody, if you're the kind of person that is an external processor, meaning you think while you talk and you talk while you're thinking, so you're working through whatever it is that you're thinking, that means you're automatically inadvertently going to take more time up during that meeting. And if you're an internal processor, which usually aligns with introversion, that means that you are likely to be processing so much information that you're not going to be ready to share everything that you've pulled together until like the very end, or maybe like the next meeting, which means automatically you will spend less time being heard in that meeting. So can the external processors try to write down their thoughts before they speak so that they give more time to the internal processors? And can the internal processors find a way to push themselves to talk through what they're processing, even maybe before they might be ready, so that we could find a way to both balance each other out in some way. That's one sort of like technique.
Oh my God. I freaking love that. You can also, in addition or in tandem with that, sharing agendas or talking points or like things ahead of time so that people have an opportunity to read it first and think about it a bit before you have the actual meeting. I mean, that can help everybody, but especially in times like now, I know that might sound like a really high standard to hold ourselves to, and it might be, because right now we're living through a particular period of chaos where there's just a lot coming down all the time. But to the extent possible, I think your strategy is brilliant, and like it will help everybody grow.
Absolutely. And your strategy, I mean, that when you do that, you extract the best out of your people, because you let them sit with their thoughts and let them process a little bit and bring all of the ideas, not just some of the ideas to the table, right? So that leads me to transition into, you wrote this in your Forbes article, and you quoted this stat, 28% higher productivity for introverted leaders. I would love to hear more about like how does that occur?
Yes, and so, credit where credit's due. This was an Adam Grant from Wharton and Company. Like, there are a couple of researchers on this study. I think they did it back in 2010, but they basically looked at different leadership teams and then looked at the output at the end. I think the example they were using was like folding t-shirts or something like relatively mundane, to measure that 28% difference in output. But I think the key to really understand there is, I mean, first of all, it does have to be an engaged team. So however that is defined, and I understand not all teams may fit that description. So, you want to look at all the factors there and make sure you're not, kind of conflating issues or things like that. But if you've got a solid team and they work well, both individually, and they've got good ideas, and there's some kind of level of gelling amongst the team, then you're going to get better results. I mean, almost by a third, if you've got an introverted leader. My kind of analysis of that is like, if you have someone who is really, and this is jumping ahead a bit into our 3 strategies, but like, you've got someone who can listen really well and like really deep listen, and who's able to kind of observe. And like you just talked about, like absorbing the information, observing the information, and kind of like, just being attuned to all of that. If you've got someone who can do that with an engaged team and then give them space, so kind of that's where you're either being like actually silent or metaphorically silent, just let them do their thing, then they're going to come up with better results. And like in this case, they innovated ways to like fold more t-shirts faster, basically. So, it makes sense intuitively if you've got someone who's has to be the loudest person in the room. And I say this without judgment, like that's kind of just the style. You are probably silencing other people and they're not going to feel as comfortable being like, hey, what if we do it like this? Or like, I had this wacky idea, which this also ties into like psychological safety at work. Do people feel safe to express their ideas, ask questions, make mistakes? So yeah, I think that combo though, like it really let a lot of leaders who prefer introversion to feel seen and heard in that, and give them some kind of credit where credit's due. But
Yeah,
I don't know how you've
absolutely.
seen it play out,
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right on. Giving a team time and space to think through, work through, not feeling like you are the one who needs to have all the answers, or assume that you do have all of the answers, and it's not possible that anybody else on the team could have all the answers.
Right.
It's half the battle, right? That there is some humility there in that,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And there's also kind of I think your article hit on something that's really important that I'd love to talk more about, which is our movement towards more quiet leadership, or maybe our desire to move more towards quiet leadership. I feel like we're sometimes moving away from that, but there's a difference between the leaders that we see that are visible, right? And the leaders we need that are not as visible, but we desperately need that.
I know.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yes, I love thinking about it that way, the leaders that we see and the leaders that we need. I think a lot of what is suboptimal, unhealthy, even toxic in workplaces is the result of us making a lot of decisions, perhaps in a knee-jerk way, perhaps in a way that we care only about the optics, where we are not actually looking at all the data and we're not taking time to make informed decisions because we're just sort of rush, bottom line, and whatever gets us the quick win. I don't think that's a smart way to operate or run a business of any size, because we should think about, yes, short-term wins, of course, but like really more mid and long-term wins. How are you setting up your team, your people, your company structure to win in the long run? It's easy to start something. It's really hard to take it into its 10th year. And I think the leaders we need are the ones who actually can help ground us all right now, because we're living in and I hate to sound like a broken record, but this is a period of time with the overstimulation is like, I don't know if you've been through a similar period of time. Like now it's like the news cycle is out of control. Everything is kind of cascading down in very unpredictable ways. There's so much uncertainty. There's a ton of fear. And I think now is a real opportunity for leaders who are thoughtful, who are more quiet, who are able to listen more than speak, can provide essential support and also solutions, whether it's like a coaching style, whether you're kind of supporting the person to come to their own solutions or the solutions are coming about some other way. That's the kind of approach that I think we need now. We've had way too much bluster of just people coming in and like doing a bunch of things really quickly with no care seemingly for what was happening before. So yeah, I know entropy is kind of like always on an upward swing, but like, could we have a little more thoughtful decision making, a little more strategy?
Yeah. And I have a couple of thoughts about this. However, we're reaching an ad break. So I'm going to hold off, keep people right on the edge of their seat until the ad break is, and we'll come back. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Branco, and our guest today, Cynthia Pong, author of Don't Stay in Your Lane, the career change guide for women of color. And we're talking about introversion today. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can find us at talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marcanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with our guest today, Cynthia Pong. And we're talking about introverted leadership and kind of the pros and cons and the impact that it could have on business outcomes. And one of the things that I talk with my Leadership Academy about often is that there's pros and cons to every kind of style. And, you know, it's not like we're saying introversion is the end all be all in all situations, right? Like there's plenty of introverted leaders who can be toxic. There's plenty of extroverted leaders who can be quite supportive and wonderful, right? Like, so it's not about that, but it is about thinking, you know, what is it that we need in certain circumstances? And if you have a highly volatile, chaotic, extreme, uncertainty kind of environment, the last thing you need is someone then to come in with all of their millions of ideas and start throwing more at the chaos and instability and, nonstop. Because what people need, and you mentioned this, is groundedness, is stability, is slowing down every once in a while. And so in those cases, when stability is necessary, an introverted style that slows down, thinks more thoughtfully, carefully, methodically, all of those things are highly needed and valued. The opposite can be true if you have a super stagnant environment and you sort of go overboard and there's just a lot of over deliberation, overthinking, over whatever, then of course, go ahead and be a disruptor, and try to make some change and do it fast or whatever. But a lot of what we're talking about is how you apply an introverted style for a very specific need and point in time. And right now, people are desperately craving that kind of stability and that kind of like slowing down and thinking through decisions a little bit more, right? So I'm curious, with that in mind, how are you thinking about like this time and place and how introverted leaders can provide value, can demonstrate value?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. And it makes me think how, and I don't know if this has happened with you, but I've had so many conversations and sessions with clients where they're like, oh, I never thought of that before. Or like, that's a really great question. And they have never made the time. And it's not a fault thing. Like they're extremely busy. They've got a ton on their plate, all of that. But like, it just goes to show how valuable creating that space and holding that space, whichever side of it you're on, is for thoughtful, intentional, deliberate, and smart and strategic decisions. And you're right that like in the Forbes piece I wrote about introverted leaders, outperforming extroverted leaders by 28%, like I wrote the end of it being like, the future is getting quieter. And it was, I will admit, it was kind of like a hopeful thing. Yeah, I also wrote that like a couple months ago. So many things have transpired since then. So it's interesting to me now that I do think the need for it is ever increasing. Like nothing good is going to come if everyone in your company, nonprofit, agency, whatever, is just spinning out of control. Now, we might still continue to observe that happening, but I think if we have enough introverted leaders or extroverted or ambivert leaders who are leveraging, this superpower that introverts have to take a breath, take some time, and literally be like, you know what, these fires are going to continue to burn. We cannot put out all the fires, but can we focus a little bit on like pulling ourselves out of the weeds and like what's actually happening? How are people? How are you doing? Like, and not every workplace is like really safe to answer that, but like in the ways that we can, right? And then that level of just creating space, making space, showing a person, your direct report, a colleague, whoever, that you actually genuinely care about how they're doing as a person, that's going to go honestly a really long way if you want to look at the actual things like productivity and like output later on, like retention for the ones you want to retain, like brand reputation for people who move on. Like, yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts around this. I really hope that that's what can happen. And to those who are introverted leaders listening, like know that you are seen and you're needed, and like try to be more visible to people, like show up, see how you can help and support. I think that's sort of the best way that we can amplify and like increase our visibility.
Yeah. So let's talk more about that.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm listening to this show, I'm in the audience and I'm like, oh my God, she's talking my language. This sounds just like me. And I feel inspired. I want to sort of like step up, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does somebody who identify as introverted become more visible in a world where around them they see kind of an undervaluing of introverted traits?
Yeah. I mean, if that isn't like the $1 million question.
I know.
So
I'm not gonna have all the answers, but I'm curious your thoughts on it.
well, I do think there's huge power in identifying it for yourself. So a couple months ago, I spoke to somebody who only very recently had realized that, they took one of these assessments or something and they realized that they are an introvert. They hadn't known, and maybe they're in their mid 30s or 40s and they just realized. So it was like a huge reframe for them, because it allowed them to look back on everything and be like, oh, that wasn't this other thing. Like I'm not just like bad at this. It's really just that I was depleted at the time because I just been through, a whole conference or something, right? I'm making up an example. But so the first thing is to identify it for yourself. And I would say give yourself time to really grapple with it. If you're coming to this realization, similar to me, kind of like later in the game, like think about it. That's one of our like superpowers. How does this impact things? Does it change anything for you? Does it change anything about your career leadership goals? Maybe it doesn't, but that's step one, I would say. Step two is I would, recommend, if you can, share it with other people, and you can do that unapologetically. Like you don't have to be like, you don't have to accept the stigma yourself, and it's not even one of the, I think, most potent stigmas out there probably. So like share it unapologetically with other people, and then see if you can support other people to recognize it in themselves, if that may be the case, right? So I think all of this becomes like a kind of virtuous cycle of like supporting, promoting, rewarding, affirming people for their innate leadership, for their introversion. But all of us have to find a way to do it our own way, which I can give an example of that, but I'm also curious your thoughts.
No, I completely agree. No, I want to hear your thoughts. I would love to hear an example. Yeah.
Classic introvert move. You could call it deflection. You could call it good questioning. So the find a way to do it your own way thing. I think about this a lot because I did sort of build my business, embrace change, and the whole kind of like brand around it in my own way, in part, I won't say as a reaction, but in response to how I turned out not to be a fit for my first career. And so like I have a huge network. I'm very grateful to have a huge network now, but I started with like less than 500 people on LinkedIn. You know, I used to not use LinkedIn at all. But the way that I got from there to like now we've got like 200K online and all the platforms or whatever is not by you know, pretending that I'm an extrovert and like covering in that way. A lot of it was done, and certainly not all of it, but like a lot of it was through the one-on-one communication, like this conversation we're having now. And the reason that Embrace Change started out with its core offering as coaching is because I love the one-on-one interaction. I just didn't want 140 clients at a time, you know? So that was me finding a way to do this thing myself and not being like, well, I can never network because I just don't like the stuffy, like you go to a conference room, everyone's handing out business cards and you're in a suit and all that. Like, no, I just found a way to redefine it for myself, and still kind of get to whatever is no end goal, but you know, I still kind of got to an end goal. Yeah, but
Yeah. You know, a couple of things I want to sort of highlight and pull out from what you said. Number one
Mhm.
is the reframe.
Mhm.
I wasn't bad at this. Like realizing that it wasn't necessarily a inner fault of yours, but a person by environment fit. And that's
Yeah.
usually the issue, right? Knowing how to recognize when the issue is that there's a misfit between
Yeah.
how you prefer to work and how you're expected to work, and recognizing that how you're expected to work does not excite you. Like
Mhm.
for some people, and I've been in the situation where I've been expected to serve in that extroverted leadership role, but
Mhm.
I was like, I want to be challenged, and so
Mhm.
I'm leaning in because
Mhm.
I intentionally want to learn that skill and want to be challenged. For
Right.
other people though, they would find it like you did, like this is burning me out every
Yeah.
time I lean in further and further, and this is
Mhm.
bad for me. And when you realize this is sucking the soul out of me and it's bad for me, that's when you know the person by environment fit is not a good situation. So
Yeah.
just the reframe of like, there is usually a person by environment fit. It's not just you, right? There's
Mhm.
always a system around you in which you can thrive or not thrive. I've been the same person in multiple environments where I didn't thrive versus did.
Yeah.
The second that you sort of mentioned is like knowing enough about your strengths that you know how to lean into them
Mhm.
in a way that like pulls out your very best, but
Yeah.
also it's kind of like I'm going to geek out here, like a Venn diagram
Yeah.
around like what my strengths are, what I want to lean into, what my environment appreciates about me,
Yeah.
and then kind of like your greatest impact point is I see a need in this organization that I can offer and I can make a greater impact because of who I am. That's like a wow, like a
Yeah.
massive impact right there.
Yes. Yes. I know, because it's like everything is aligned, you know, and you know, I'm kind of a pessimist by personality as well. So like that may not happen for everyone, but I do wish and hope that it happens for everyone at some point in their career, that they can sort of feel that. And I also am someone who like I'm driven by trying to find optimal efficiency. You know what I mean? That's like the problem solving compulsion that I have, and like many others perhaps, where it's like you see the gap and you're like, I see the potential, like why, you know, can't we get there? But it's through thinking in that way, in a very like, you know, systematic, scientific, data-driven way of how can you align these? Do you harness your strengths? You minimize the stuff that's draining you and all that, and then, you know, you can really thrive. Like that sounds to me like
Yeah.
thriving, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Okay. We're reaching another brief ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Cynthia Pong, and we will be right back in just a moment.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with our guest today, Cynthia Pong. So Cynthia, we have dissected everything about introverted leadership, gone in multiple directions, but I'd love to hear some sort of like practical tips and experiences, like, what are some of the challenges that the people that you've worked with have faced most commonly? And what have you seen has really worked?
Yeah, I love this. And I'm sure you've had, I'm interested to see kind of how it parallels with experiences you've had and stuff like that too. But two kind of examples of, if we could think of them as like case studies, stand-ins for situations I've seen where the introversion, and it's very intersectional as well. One challenge is struggling to speak for our work. So, there's that old saying of like, your work speaks for itself. I feel with people who are women of color, people of color, women in general, anyone from a marginalized background, you have to speak for your work. It's otherwise too easy for you to be overlooked and all of the things. That's a whole other kind of topic. But I have one client that I've worked with for years. She's an introvert, a brilliant global leader in consumer insights, marketing insights. That's kind of her area. And she's great at it because she loves getting into research. The learning, the curiosity, that whole kind of experience and practice of itself. And so vocalizing and promoting her own work so that people know what she did, people know the impact that she had, that's a challenge. So over the years, we've really worked on this, and there has been discomfort when it's come to her, like having to advocate for herself in the workplace. And it just really feels like anathema to her. So that's one struggle, kind of struggling to speak for our work. And all of that. The second one is kind of being, and we've touched on this a bit too, but being overlooked for opportunities because you are not perceived to be leadership material. So I have another client who's an introvert and used to work in education, academia, just repeatedly passed over for opportunities. It's a combination of racism, sexism, I would say, and the introversion, but always stuck at that like number 2 position and just severely overworked. And honestly, things got so bad and toxic in those workplaces. That's kind of almost a separate thing, but very related. But anyway, she totally brilliant, 10x more capable than who she's reporting to, which is very frustrating when you're in that day to day, week to week. It can really eat at you. But the powers that be, wanted the number 1 position to be filled by someone who met certain criteria. So the combination of that, just the repeated disrespect of that and the lack of acknowledgement, the lack of valuing, plus how overstimulating and over demanding the work was. It was just a terrible combo. And so as far as like how to address those, I can get into a couple things, but I also want to know if you have any thoughts.
No, I love these. These are so common, and that I would love to hear more about how you,
Okay, cool. So, for the first client where it was like a challenge for her to speak up for her work, she also happened to be Asian American. So there's that additional bias of like, oh, you're quiet, or like there's, I think, some kind of biases related to, or some assumptions related to that. But, in working with her, me as kind of the outsider coach with like more of a bird's eye view, we've just really made it a priority to work on her self-advocacy, make sure she has that visibility and gets more and more comfortable, pushing into that discomfort zone, like you talked about earlier, to speak about her work in a way where she takes ownership over her leadership. Because she's like a global director, she's not entry level by any means. So we like made action plans around it, concrete goals. She set her own KPIs basically around it, like having regular one-on-ones where she would mention things that she did and present to her supervisor and those above him too, regularly, the impact she had made, what happened because she was leading this work and all of that. And the key, I'll just add for people who are like, well, I don't think I could ever do that. The key for her literally was tapping into her why. Like, what was the motivation behind her work? What's the bigger career and life mission she's advancing? And then my job as her like executive coach was like making sure she continued to understand the connection between that and speaking for her work and why she had to keep doing it. So that was the first client. The second one, I mean, it was kind of like the ultimate decision there. Like she just had to leave that workplace. All of the kind of more smaller tweaks and stuff like that, those solutions weren't working. It was so systemic in this issue that no individual solution was going to change that. But the work for that client, who was, she's a Black woman in academia. So like there's a lot that comes with that. Her job really was making sure she didn't internalize what wasn't on her and what wasn't for her. Like, don't pick up what's not for you. It's very hard, and I don't want to make it sound easy or whatever. But it's very hard when you're just swimming in toxicity not to ingest some of that. But like the job is to make sure you minimize as much as possible. And so for her to continue seeing all of her strengths as strengths, like don't drink their Kool-Aid, and healing and learning from that time so that she didn't end up in a similar position, again, like metaphorically and literally. So I don't know what your thoughts are on.
I love those two examples for so many reasons. Number one, so many people can relate to these experiences, and especially women and women from marginalized backgrounds, women of color. And I think what is challenging is, like you were saying, the internalized messages. We are told most of our lives that we shouldn't, quote unquote, self-promote because it's off-putting, right?
Yeah.
So then by the time it's time to advocate and share your work,
right,
we automatically judge ourselves because of internalized sexism and all those messages that I can't possibly share my work because it will be seen as off-putting and serving and selfish and self-promoting, whatever. So you offered a lot of different ways to see this as like you're advocating for yourself, you are taking ownership of your leadership, you're pulling out your why. Love all of these ways to extract yourself from the negative messaging, right? And then the same thing for your second one, understand, like, I would say like 80% of the battle is extracting who you are from who you're told you are.
Ooh,
right?
That's a good one. Yeah.
I mean, and it is hard when, like you said, when you're swimming in it, to figure out like what part of this is me that I need to work on because it's my stuff, and what part is the environment around me that has led me to this place of believing this about myself.
Oh my God, that's so huge. And like, it's really difficult because like there's no literal mirror for you to see. Right. And so I say to a lot of leaders in like our community stuff too, when you are used to looking at a funhouse mirror, because that's what everyone's been telling you your whole career, and, including maybe your family, maybe, your community, right? Then when you look in a real mirror, you're like, that's not me.
Yes.
And I feel like that's the process that coaching can be, and being in a supportive environment, but it's so disarming, and it can really, that process can be really difficult and fraught. So
absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I can't believe that we're already reaching the end of our time together. Tell us more about where they can find you, and especially the resources that they can use. And I'm for those of you who are watching right now, I'm sharing, but for those of you listening, that she's going to share a little bit about where you can find more about her.
Yes, thank you, Mira. So I have a free resource that's super popular with our community. It's called 5 Leadership Tips for Women of Color, but certainly anyone from any background can use them. You can go to embracechange.nyc/5-leadership-tips, and you can grab that totally for free. It's got the really not run-of-the-mill stuff. I don't do run-of-the-mill, so it's not going to be things you've heard elsewhere. They're pretty juicy tips, so I won't spoil it, but go and grab that. It's free. What have you got to lose? And then just in general, if people want to find out about me, embracechange.nyc, you can see all our work. And we talked about, oh yeah, you can go back to that, Mira, sorry. Oh yeah, perfect. The Forbes article about introverted leaders outperforming extroverted leaders. If you just Google Cynthia Pong Forbes, you'll find my whole column. You can just scroll down and find it. And be sure to follow on there so you're aware of all my future articles.
Excellent, excellent. And I already know after talking with you that nothing that you will share is run of the mill. I've really appreciated our conversation together. Audience, what did you take away from today? And more importantly, what is one small change that you can implement this week, whether it's for yourself or for your team? Lean into it, share it with us on LinkedIn. You heard she's got a wide following, and we will cheer you on, whatever you choose. You could also share it on talkradio.nyc. Talkradio.nyc is also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Apple, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, all over the place. But LinkedIn is where we live if you want to find us. So if you really resonated with today's show, also make sure that you share it with a colleague, leave a review, subscribe. The stuff that we like to talk about on this show is also part of my research-based strategic leadership pathway roadmap I use in my socially conscious organizational misfits on their leadership journey. To learn more about us, go to gotowerscope.com. And thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting. Together, we will navigate the complexities of leadership and emerge stronger on the other side. Thank you for joining me and Cynthia Pong today on this journey. This is Dr. Mira signing off. Until next time, stay steady, stay present, and keep building those hard skills. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you so much.